Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the October 7th, 2013 meeting of the Town of Los Gatos Joint Town Council Parking Authority. First, let me ask that you put your smartphones on vibrate or silent. And secondly, if you intend to speak to us on any item on our agenda or on verbal communications, please fill out one of these buff-colored cards and give it to the clerk over here to my left. And going to the clerk, would you please call the roll?
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Joe Przynski.
Here.
Councilmember Marcia Jensen.
Here.
Councilmember Diane McNutt.
Here.
Vice Mayor Steve Leonardis.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Barbara Spector.
Here. Now, sometimes we get some things that are very special, and before I go to the Pledge of Allegiance, I want to read to you a letter that I received. It was sent on May 28th, 2013, and it says, "Dear Ms. Mayor, my grandpa and I were on an adventure, and while we were coming back, we found this sign on the ground, and I decided to bring it on our way back. I knew the sign belonged to the city, so I put it on the side of the road for a city worker to get it. The sign was left beside Creekside's Village Drive, Los Gatos, Saratoga Road. Sincerely, Jaden Conover, age 7, and then he draws a picture of the sign at the bottom of the letter. I mean, this really struck a responsive chord with me, and so I'm going to invite up here to join me to help us lead the Pledge of Allegiance, Jaden Conover. Now, I don't know if our camera could get it, but just in case it can, I'm going to hold up the letter with the cool sign that you drew at the bottom. Thank you, Jaden. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about Jaden. He's a third grader at St. Mary's School. His favorite subjects are math, science, art, and physical education. He is a Cub Scout. He volunteers at his church and assists in keeping his community clean by picking up litter along the Los Gatos Creek Trail. He plays football, basketball, baseball, tennis, and likes to swim. He likes fishing, reading, and going on adventures. When Jaden was only 4 years old, he hiked to the summit of the landmark mountain in Quincy, California. He also likes catching blue-bellied lizards. Round of applause. And if you all stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's give him another round of applause. So, progressing along with communications to the mayor, within the past week, I received an email. And that email was from Satara Rigoni and Christina Rozova. And they asked if the mayor would issue a proclamation for the Day of the Girl. And it was coming from them on behalf of the Los Gatos High's Girl Up Club. And so I'm going to ask these two young women to join me up at the front there while I read to you and present to them the proclamation. So why don't I get one of you on each side of me here? And I'll let one of you hold it while I read it. Whereas girls worldwide face many injustices, such as discrimination, gender stereotypes, child marriage, lack of education, sex trafficking, and gender-based violence, and whereas gender equality and universal primary education are among the United Nations Millennium Development Goals supported by 189 countries, including the United States, and whereas the United Nations designated October 11th as the International Day of the Girl Child to be observed every year beginning in 2012, and whereas Los Gatos, California has historically been a leader in commitment to education, human rights, and equality of life for all citizens, and whereas Los Gatos High School's Girl Up Club is one such club which works with the United Nations Foundation to advocate for equality for girls domestically and internationally, and whereas recognizing all girls' potential and speaking out against gender-based injustices will encourage girls to follow their dreams and to discourage gender discrimination. Now, therefore, be it resolved, I, Barbara Spector, by the virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of the town of Los Gatos, do deem it appropriate and do hereby proclaim Friday, October 11th, 2013, as the Day of the Girl in the town of Los Gatos.
Good evening. On behalf of the Los Gatos High School Girl Up Club, we would like to thank all council members, especially Mayor Spector and Ms. Linda Seastrom, who have supported our initiative with the United Nations Girl Up Foundation, and for their endorsement of the first Day of the Girl in the town of Los Gatos on October 11th, 2013. On December 19th, 2011, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution to declare October 11th as the International Day of the Girl Child, establishing a day in recognition of girls' rights and the unique challenges girls face around the world.
Los Gatos has historically been a leader in commitment to education, human rights, and equality of life for all citizens, and thus it is fitting that the town of Los Gatos join the Girl Up Foundation and other local and state organizations to advocate for equality for girls domestically and internationally by endorsing Day of the Girl each year on October 11th. Celebrating all girls' potential and speaking out against gender-based injustices will encourage girls to follow their dreams and to discourage gender discrimination.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Closed session report, Ms. Prop.
Thank you, Mayor and council members, members of the public. The council met in closed session this evening, as duly noted on the agenda that was posted. They took no action on these items. There's nothing to report out this evening.
All right, council town manager reports, beginning with council matters. Does any member of the council have anything to report out? Mr. Przinski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to report that on September 19th and 20th, I attended the League of Cities annual conference in Sacramento on behalf of the town and acted as our voting delegate.
Anyone else? All right. The gender, that's what I'm thinking about, all of the things we've been discussing. The General Plan Committee that I attended along with Mr. Przinski met, and we finalized our consideration of the overlay zone, which is on your agenda. We had a North 40 Advisory Committee meeting within the past 2 weeks, where we continue on with our discussion and decisions on the specific plan. Importantly, I want to announce to those of you in the audience and on the listening audience that the deadline for individuals to apply for our commissions has been extended to October 18th, 2013, to October 18th. And so I encourage any one of you who is interested in one of our committees to please get your application in by October 18th. If you have any questions, you may go to the town's website and receive information on those commissions and how to apply. Manager matters.
Mayor and Council, 2 items. First, last Tuesday, the town's community outreach coordinator, Jackie Rose, and I hosted our first next door neighborhood training upstairs in the library computer lab. It was a full house. One of the attendees is actually in the audience. And in preparation for that, we learned that of the 24 designated neighborhoods in Los Gatos, 6 of them already have over 40% of the households actively engaged online, sharing crime reports, giveaways, referrals, and recommendations. And this has been one of the tools our community outreach coordinator has been using to strengthen the town's ties with its neighborhoods. And given the strong success of our first training last week, wanted to make sure the council was aware of it. Also, last Tuesday, there was a letter to the editor in the Los Gatos Weekly Times talking about the fluoridation of water in Los Gatos. That letter stated that Mayor Spector and the town had approved the fluoridation of water in Los Gatos. That is completely inaccurate. The town has never approved nor even considered the fluoridation of water in Los Gatos. That is the sole responsibility and authority of the Santa Clara Valley Water District, a completely separate governmental entity that the town has no control over. That concludes staff report tonight, except for tonight's Did You Know, which will be presented by Jackie Rose, our community outreach coordinator. Ms. Rose?
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Did you know that the Los Gatos Montesino Police Department and the town of Los Gatos provide information and training to prepare our community in the event of a disaster? These opportunities include promoting preparedness to community groups via the town's community outreach database, nextdoor.com, What's New, and local media. We also conduct presentations and training to promote personal emergency preparedness year-round, but especially during the month of October, which is Los Gatos Prepared Month. This year, the Los Gatos Montesino CERT teams will be conducting Los Gatos Prepared presentations at the Farmers Market every Sunday, and on October 13th at the Farmers Market, Lenardi's, all 3 Safeways in town, and Ace Hardware. The CERT teams will be providing 72-hour emergency supply lists, family communication and reunion plans, tips for earthquake and pandemic flu, and preparedness for seniors, pets, and residents with special needs. For more information on home and personal emergency preparedness or our CERT program, please visit www.losgatosca.gov/Los Gatos Prepared, or you can contact me, Jackie Rose, at 408-354-6853. We hope to see you out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rose. Questions? Thank you. Next on our agenda, we have the consent calendar. All items on the consent calendar will be voted upon in one motion unless somebody from the council or the public pulls an item from the consent calendar. I will note that agenda item 3, which is zoning amendment A1301, has been pulled from the consent calendar by a member of the public, so it will be heard. Does a member of the council wish to pull anything else from the consent calendar? Seeing no one, does anyone else from the audience wish to pull an item from the consent calendar? Noting that no one is coming forward, I will look to the council for a motion. Mr. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Move to approve the consent calendar with excluding item 3.
I have a motion
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Jensen. Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. We will now go to Agenda Item 3. The individual, Jess B. Guy, who pulled the item from the consent calendar, will be asked first to explain to us why it's being pulled or why he pulled it. And for the record, this is Zoning Code Amendment A1301, Firearm Regulation. Applicant, Town of Los Gatos. A, adopt ordinance amending Chapter 29, zoning regulations of the town code regarding the 1, retail sale of firearms, ammunition, and/or destructive devices; 2, home occupation permits; and 3, duties of the planning commission and town council. B, adopt ordinance repealing the portion of the town code, section 18.70.015, that allows the discharging of firearms on private property. Mr. Guy.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Only a portion of that's going to be addressed. My name is Jess Guy, 14275 Mulberry Drive. What I wanted to do is talk about the process by which Templar is going to have to renew its license pursuant to some of the new regulations which are contained within the document. If that satisfies the council, I'm happy to go ahead. If it doesn't satisfy the council, I'll sit down.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
What I wanted to discuss were some of the issues that were contained within the ordinance to identify some areas which we felt were defective. And if the council wants to hear those, I'm happy to go ahead about
Yeah,
it.
as the individual who pulled the item from the consent calendar, you get to explain to us why you are pulling it from the consent calendar.
Okay.
So it's up to you.
That's fine, thank you. Templars, do we going to go back to the 3-minute drop or?
No, this is not verbal communication. Well, I guess it is. It's you do have a 3-minute. You do.
It is.
So let's start it again for him.
Thank you. Sometimes processes get confusing to me. Members of the council, I wanted to start off just by discussing the fact that Templar Sports, who is impacted by this ordinance, is going to be renewing its license pretty soon. And because the ordinance was passed, more public hearings are going to be held. That means we all come back and listen to people talk. Opinions, pro and con, will be repeated probably. We might even see a return to some of the statements that were divisive and emotional, which were not helpful. I listened to a lot of half-truths, lies, and distortions perpetuated by people that were dealing with Templar Sports. I didn't like it. The ignorance that was demonstrated also about laws, about regulations, about firearms were covered many times. And what bothered me most was the fact that this council passed some ordinances which also reflect a lack of such knowledge. I found it hard to believe that after weeks of deliberations, you passed ordinances which redefined firearms, which redefined destructive devices, such that almost any innocuous device can be called a weapon. Part of the ordinance deals with this 250-foot safety zone. I think that isolating a firearms licensee behind 250 feet by legislative fiat seems to say that nobody who's outside of that zone will ever be harmed. I think that's pretty naive. 250 feet makes Templar Sports a non-conforming entity. If you had recommended 200 feet, it would be a conforming entity, and that would have been okay, but that would, I think, defeated the goal of this council, and I think the goal of this council and others is to drive Templar Sports out of Los Gatos. Templars violated no laws, local, federal, or state. They complied with all requests from the council. They've tried to work with the council. I would ask the council to thoughtfully consider or reconsider its anti-Templar stance. Templar Sports is not an enemy of anyone. They do not force their business on anyone. They do not demand anything from anyone, nor do they foster attacks on anyone when facing this council. The entire unfortunate lengthy debate need not have happened if adult reasoning had been applied in the first place. Taxpayer money, taxpayer time, town council time could all have been avoided if people would have come together, looked at this in an adult, rational manner, and been able to discuss it. Unfortunately, emotions took the better of many people, and while it may not be too late to resolve this in the future, we are going to have more hearings, and I don't want to see those hearings deteriorate into name-calling or into the distortions that I heard before. Thank you.
Questions of the speaker? Seeing none, thank you. Since this is a public hearing, does anyone else wish to address us on this item? Noting for the record that no one is coming forward, I will close the public testimony portion of the hearing and look to the council members for discussion, motion, questions. Ms. Jensen?
I'd like to make a motion that we adopt zoning code amendment A-13-01 firearm regulation, applicant Town of Los Gatos. As the mayor read earlier, both portion A and B, which repeals the ordinance allowing discharging of firearms. Council discussed this carefully, both ad hoc and in public hearings to which people could attend. These ordinances are ordinances which go forward. They are not specifically directed at Templar sports. The 250-foot limit for sensitive receptors was carefully discussed. It's supported by case law and is also contained, and it's in fact less than that contained in other ordinances that have been upheld by courts in California. And for that reason, I move to adopt the ordinance.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to discussion. Ms. McNutt?
Thank you, Mayor. I just would like to note for the record that because the portion of 3A was actually two different motions made by the council 2 or 3 weeks ago, that I did vote no on the second motion, which had to do with amortization. But otherwise, I'll be supporting the rest of item number 3.
All right, thank you. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously with the one caveat that Ms. McNutt did put on the record. Thank you. We are now at verbal communications. This allows any member of the public who wishes to address us 3 minutes to talk to us. I would ask you to submit a card. No one has submitted a card on verbal communications, but if you wish to come on up. Someone has submitted a card on verbal communications, and if anyone else does, please give your card to the clerk over here. We have Ben Mulsoff. If you'll come on up, you'll have 3 minutes.
Ms. Mayor and Council, thank you for hearing me. My name is Ben Musoff, and I'm representing Campo de Bacci of Los Gatos. In the recent past, there's been some noise ordinance issues in the town, and I just want to go on record saying that as a member of the community and a personal graduate of the leadership program of the town, we're doing what we can to be a part of the community and the town in the area, to be proactive to make sure that we're doing what we can to make sure that we're in compliance. There have been issues. Those issues are being addressed currently in regards to our delivery times and making sure that we're working with the immediate surrounding neighbors to make sure that everybody is in good graces with each other. So I just wanted to go on record knowing that there is an issue in town and that we are being proactive as possible.
Thank you. Questions of the speaker? Seeing none, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I have no other cards. Anyone else wish to address us on verbal communications? Noting that no one is coming forward. We are on public hearings. And agenda item 6, which is a long one here, but I'm going to put it all into the record. This is to introduce an ordinance amending Chapter 29 zoning regulations of the town code to incorporate the following revisions required to implement the state certified housing element. A, adoption of an emergency shelter definition and allowing the use of a permitted use in the controlled manufacturing zone. B, adoption of a universal design reasonable accommodation ordinance for disabled persons. C, amending the family definition to conform with state law. D, adoption of a transitional housing definition and allowing the use of a permitted use in the residential multifamily zone. E, removal of the multifamily conditional use permit requirement and allowing multifamily uses as a permitted use in the residential multifamily zone. F, amending the group home and small family residential care facility definitions to conform to the Community Care Facilities Act. And G, other minor amendments necessary to implement the revisions. Your staff report will probably be shorter, but Mr. Larson, you're raising your hand first.
I just wanted to suggest, since you've read the title of the ordinance, we no longer need the clerk to read the title, and the council could move to waive the reading of the ordinance itself. No, you can move it later then, is what the attorney recommends.
All right. I understand, Mr. Ordonez, you're going to be doing our staff report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Erwin Ordonez for Community Development. As you noted, what council has before you this evening is the introduction of the proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance, which will implement the housing element as adopted by the council in March of 2012 and subsequently certified by the state in September 2012. More importantly, the amendments will also bring the town into compliance with applicable state and federal housing regulations. That's getting us caught up for some of the things that the town may have not adopted in the past. The implementation actions from the housing element were required to be implemented within 1 year of adoption, but due to the late certification by state HCD of the housing element, they have advised the town staff that these implementation items should be adopted as soon as possible before the end of the current period, which ends on December 31st of this year. The amendments that you have before you this evening are grouped into 5 areas. There are the revisions to existing use definitions, which include the family and group home definitions that we have in the ordinance. There's the establishment of new permitted uses, such as the emergency shelter and transitional uses, the allowances of multifamily uses as a permitted use in the multifamily residential zone, the establishment of administrative processes to address federal and state disability and housing laws, and the assignment of duties in the town code for the accommodation ordinance, as well as establishing the appeals process for that. Staff recommends conducting the public hearing, making appropriate findings, and the actions to waive the reading as noted by the manager, and introduction of the ordinances and the amendments. The recommendations before you were both reviewed by the General Plan Committee as well as the Planning Commission, and they recommended approval at both bodies. And this pretty much concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions or comments from council.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? Seeing none, we'll now go to the public hearing. Again, if you want to speak, please submit a card. And I do have a card on this item. Jeff Lockridge, you'll have 3 minutes.
My name is Jeff Lockridge, and I wanted to talk about A first on this agenda item. And again, I'm going to say what I've said before. I don't understand why some of these things end up in the north end of town. Well, I mean, obviously that's the only place where the controlled manufacturing is, but I would just say that's pretty convenient to be able to put it down there. And the things that I read had mentioned that usually controlled manufacturing isn't around single-family homes, and unfortunately, that's not the case in this case. It's around single-family homes on all sides of it. So I don't think that that's the best place for it, and I think it should be shifted to the north, the south end of town. I mean, you actually came up with a solution that made sense for the south end of town, but not the north end of town. So that's my concern there. I think it should be moved. And that's for the emergency shelter. And on the transitional housing, I understand that nobody really wants it in their neighborhood. And the solution of putting it into the same areas that have apartment complexes and townhouses and things like that, it's separating it from the south end or the more important end of town. And we pay taxes, everybody pays taxes the same. And it doesn't make sense to penalize, or better yet, not share that load with everybody in town. I mean, it should be fair on how you dole out these state requirements. And I realize it doesn't have to be built. It's just a requirement that it be zoned that way. But once it's zoned that way, and you're using this opportunity to change the zoning, then it's really hard to rezone. It takes a long time. This one's going through pretty quickly. And then lastly, I'd like to resuggest that the town of Los Gatos establish a housing element advisory board that I had suggested before that would include residents across the town, so that the housing element moving forward wouldn't be handled the same way that Wendy handled it and saved everything until the last second, so that we had to solve everything in the last year and a half, where we should be solving it all along. So that's it.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Lockridge? Seeing none, thank you, sir. I have no one else who submitted a card. Does anyone else wish to address us on agenda item 6? Noting that no one is coming forward, I will close the public testimony portion of this hearing and look to the council. But before I do that, does staff have anything else to add?
Only a couple of items regarding the controlled manufacturing zone. The state's mandate is basically that we have to find a zoning where we have to allow it as a permitted use. Staff took great pains to review the Housing Accountability Act that requires the shelters. We also reviewed the censuses to try to determine the number of units that would be allowed here in terms of emergency shelter. And we have, as a town, the ability to set standards. And what staff did in developing this for both the General Plan Committee and the Planning Commission was to right-size these shelters. The feeling was a controlled manufacturing zone. You do have larger parcels, and it was a little bit more appropriate there in terms of where you could site these facilities. There are protections in the definitions in terms of having to abide by housing code, as well as applicable building codes as well, where there is review. And we feel that with the parameters that are set there, that there's adequate controls for the town. In the discussions with State HCD, they thought that this was a great approach in terms of trying to address this issue, and it's a really tough issue to deal with.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Jensen.
Mr. Ordonez, when I was on general plan, I recall that we discussed, as it says in our staff report, the town participates with other jurisdictions in Santa Clara County to provide homeless services. And there was some discussion about, well, essentially, did that count against a shelter? And I'm assuming the answer was no, but could you explain to me what happened there?
The town is very proud of the fact that it participates in a consortium of addressing homelessness here in the county. That being said, the state mandate is that you have to do a local specific analysis and use the information that's available. There have been 2 homeless censuses that have been done in the town. The most recent had documented there were about 18 individuals. The good news for the town is that the majority of those individuals had some form of housing, but it was not fairly regular. So in order to meet the state mandates, we had to go through that analysis and also had to go through the exercise of trying to find a zoning where it would be amenable to having a facility with sufficient size to accommodate, in theory, those individuals and any potential increases down the road. Staff felt that the 20-unit number was appropriate, and that was the standard that we were able to adopt locally, that we felt was something that the town could control. We would be able to review it in terms of an architectural site review, and that it would be taken through DRC, so we'd have adequate reviews by police, the building official, planning, and we would have the ability to also do a referral to outside agencies as well to make sure that any proposed shelter was going to basically be run well. We did also get commentary from EHC Life Builders as well as the state that given the way that the shelter systems are set up currently, that they're mainly centralized in larger shelters, and there was very low likelihood that we would actually even get an application here in Los Gatos given how the funding works out. Generally, they're larger operators like Nextdoor or EHC Life Builders because of the competitive nature of the funding. And so we felt very comfortable with the recommendation that was proposed.
Further questions? Mr. Brzezinski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to put on the record my commendation to Mr. Ordonez for the work he did with the General Plan Committee and with the Planning Commission. I think it was very thorough. Those of us who were on the General Plan Committee, I think, felt very comfortable with not only the analysis but the outcomes of those meetings. And I think that as part of a region that is dedicated to quality of life for everybody, I think that this puts us in good stead, and certainly I would like to recommend that we approve this, and I will make the motion if that's agreeable with the mayor.
All right, and moving to the second page of our staff report, we will not be asking the clerk administrator to reread the title of the ordinance. And so, Mr. Brzezinski, if you could go on from there. I see the first one doesn't require a motion, but...
Right, and I think I'll make this as an omnibus motion. So the first is to accept the Planning Commission's findings and recommendations, which were in favor of what is in front of us, and that's on attachment 3 of our packet, and as the mayor indicated, there is no motion required for that. But in the motion, I move to make the required findings that the proposed zoning code amendments are consistent with the general plan and its element, and that's contained in attachment 4. I also move that we accept the recommendation of the Planning Commission and move to adopt zoning code amendment A1303 and move to waive the reading of the zone change ordinance. And finally, as the conclusion of this motion, move to introduce the ordinance of the Town of Los Gatos affecting the zoning code amendment of the Town Code A1303 attained in attachment 5 in our report.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Ms. McNutt?
Second.
Discussion. All right, I'm going to be supporting this motion in part because of the statements made by Mr. Brzezinski. As a member of the General Plan Committee, the recommendations coming forward did not come forward lightly. They were seriously considered, seriously studied, and I have great respect for the members of the General Plan Committee and for the work they did on this proposed ordinance. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Ordonez. Agenda item 7. This is conditional use permit application U13005, subdivision application M13001, architecture and site application S13008 through S13011, property location 550 Hubble Way, property owner 17230 Buena Vista Partners LLC, applicant appellant Gregory Howell. This is before us as an appeal. We are being asked to consider the appeal of Planning Commission decisions denying a request for conditional use permit for construction of 4 condominiums on property zoned RM 1220. Question of staff. I intended to, since this is an appeal, begin with the appellant as opposed to staff. Any issue with regard to that?
No, that's fine.
The only comment we would make is that there was a desk item provided for this evening's consideration as well.
And why don't you, for the record, just tell us what that desk item is?
The desk item includes a letter that was received at the actual Planning Commission hearing on July 10th, and that letter did not get forwarded to the council. It was from Elizabeth McCoy, who is the manager at the Muraloma Apartments. And I wanted to make sure the council saw that, even though her testimony is in the record, in the verbatim minutes that were provided as an attachment. Also, there were some inquiries from council, and so staff prepared the desk item to address those comments and questions. And if you'd like, I can go through them, or if anyone has any questions, I can respond to questions.
So that we're all on the same page, and so that whoever is speaking for the appellant knows what the information is, I would ask you to read it or summarize it for us verbally.
Okay, there was a question about what portion of the road is public versus private, and we can put an exhibit up and I can explain that. The manager's going to put that up on the overhead so everyone can see what we're talking about. So a portion of Hubble Way is private and a portion is public. The town obtains right-of-way grants when the opportunity is there, and it usually entails having some sort of development proposal. So the connecting portion where Hubble Way tees into University Avenue, which is outlined in green, is private. And the portion of the roadway that you see in front of the project site that's yellow is the public street. So Avery Lane comes into and ties into Hubble at that curve. The piece in front of the property that's outlined in the darker color is going to be granted as right-of-way if the project's approved as proposed, and that would leave the entire frontage of the property as public street, but you see that little L-shaped portion, that would remain private. Yeah, the green portion would remain private. The remainder of it would be public. So the property has access rights through Hubble, the private portion, and it also has the ability to access through the public street, Avery Lane, onto Hubble. There was a question about the minimum of 4 units being proposed and whether that's a requirement for development of this property. Although the RM 12 to 20 zone is intended for higher density housing, the council does have the discretion to approve a project with fewer units. Staff was not able to find any codes or policies in either the town code or the general plan that restrict density to the minimum of the density range or require it to be developed at a certain percentage of the density range. The general plan land use element does have a summary about the different zoning districts, and it does state that they are desirable density ranges for each of those designations. So the potential number of units for this property based on the 12 to 20 units per acre established by the zoning designation would be between 4 and 6. We had a question about guest parking for single-family and multifamily uses. A single-family residence requires 2 spaces per unit. Multifamily units require 2.5 spaces per unit. That is based on a requirement of 1.5 spaces per unit plus 1 space for guest parking per unit. The commission and or council, as the deciding body, does have the discretion with parking for visitors to determine that either more or less is appropriate based on the site constraints and the individual property characteristics. We had a question about whether the developer could seek a zone change or propose a planned development. A planned development is not allowed on this property because of its size. The minimum lot size for a PD would be 40,000 square feet. This property is a little larger than 15,000, so it would not qualify for a PD. While a rezoning could be proposed, the 2 logical zones that would be possible would be an either R1D zoning designation, which would allow lot sizes of 5,000 square feet, or an R18, which would allow 8,000 square foot lots. When that right-of-way section is granted, the property net will be under 15,000 square feet. It'll be a little under 14,000 actually. So an R18 zoning would not allow any subdivision of that property. An R1D would allow potentially 2 lots. If the property were developed as it exists with no kind of subdivision, it could be a single home, a duplex, or multiple units as being proposed. Lastly, there's some background on the approved project on Town Terrace that is a similar composition to the one that is being proposed here. The property on Town Terrace was originally proposed for development in 2008. At that time, the proposal was to move the historic house and to build 2 additional single-family residences. That proposal went through Planning Commission and was recommended. When the council considered it, it was not approved. Council was concerned that the potential additional units that could be added under the multifamily designation would not be achieved if that particular proposal was approved. That original proposal in 2008 included a rezoning to R1D from the RM zoning designation, and it also included a general plan amendment from high density to medium density. So ultimately, what got approved was this historic house got moved onto a lot that got subdivided off. That was zoned R1D. It's on the corner of Town Terrace and University, and it became the Sunset House. The remainder parcel was developed as a multifamily detached condominium project, and 3 units were ultimately approved by the Planning Commission. And that concludes the desk item, and staff is available if you have any questions.
All right, before we go to the appellant, do we have questions of staff? See none. The appellant has 10 minutes to make its presentation. If it is a team of individuals, you have a collective 10 minutes. If you could please give us your name and proceed.
Okay, my name is Chris Spalding, architect. Well, let me start by saying when we started out on this project, my clients and I, the idea was to provide as much housing as possible and to do a family-friendly project. And the concept was to do, instead of a multifamily condominium complex or apartment block type of project, was to do something more similar to the Town Terrace project, which was more like single-family houses, but in a dense form. So it achieves the four units that the lot is zoned for, but in a kind of a transitional form, because there's single-family houses on one side and apartments and condo complexes on the other. So it kind of provides that nice transition. It's more family-friendly than, these are 3-bedroom houses, than attached buildings, which always have problems with noise between units and kids jumping up and down on the floor above and that type of thing. It also allows for more private yard space that's in control of the owners, rather than shared driveways that are always a hazard for kids. It allows for more parking, which is one of the main concerns of the neighborhood, because as opposed to a multifamily building where you have, in a lot like this, you would probably have a driveway on each side that would serve 2 buildings and their collective garages. Those driveways always have to remain open so everybody can access their garages, so the fire department can come. Whereas when they're developed like this, each house has its own driveway, the people can allow their guests to park in the driveway. So in each of these 4 houses, they have at least 2 open spaces on their driveway that can serve as guest parking. So it's nice in that regard. One of the concerns was the mass and bulk, but the mass and bulk of these 4 separate buildings is essentially the same as the same size units pushed together. There'd be some more wider side yard space, but in some ways the roofs would be taller because we'd have a larger building that we'd be covering unless we did something unattractive. And they didn't want to do fewer units because then you're no longer doing more of an entry-level family housing. You'd be if this was down to like 2 single-family dwellings, so that you did it purely as like the R1 that other zoning would allow, then the cost would go up for the housing. It would no longer kind of serve that function that this zone district is the whole purpose of the thing, to provide denser housing and kind of more affordable housing. I think the other items, if you read through the minutes from the Planning Commission hearings, a lot of the time was spent on things like the road access, which I think the staff has done a good job of explaining that this parcel has access without any issues. And then a lot of the other commentary during the Planning Commission hearing was whether or not this should be, that whether you could have this form of building under a condominium ownership, which has already been done in Town Terrace. It shouldn't be an issue. So I think to conclude, I think to get 4 units on this parcel, this is a nice way to do it. It transitions nicely from the single-family houses to one side to the multifamily that's all around it, and makes for attractive dwellings for families. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions of the speaker? Ms. Jensen.
Mr. Spalding, has the submission that we have before us tonight in terms of the plans or the nature of the project changed at all from the Planning Commission hearing on September 11th?
The only thing we did was to include in the plans the window shading and moving of a window that the neighbor asked for. The neighbor.
Okay. But there's no fundamental change in the plan, correct?
That was just responding to one request for privacy, yeah.
And if you're the person to answer this, if I may, you characterize the Planning Commission discussion as whether this, quote, type of building, unquote, was appropriate for the lot. As I watched the meetings and read the minutes, my understanding was that the questioning was as to the structure of the condominium ownership, not the nature of the building. And that the Planning Commission was actually troubled by the creative definition of condominium ownership that you were using to get essentially 4 single-family houses. So at one point, you said at the July 10th meeting, quote, "This is a condominium because you can't subdivide a lot of this size, so the only way to have kind of individual ownership is to have condominium ownership." So if that still is a correct statement, can you tell me what the owners of the 4 single-family residences own in common?
The only common ownership would be the insurance. Yeah.
Further questions? Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I was also read the Planning Commission minutes and had similar questions to Councilmember Jensen. I guess where the confusion lies is who will own the lot. Are these going to be 4 separate APN numbers and 4 separate properties on 4 separate parcel numbers?
No, it's like I don't know if you've seen a condominium map. So I guess they're separately taxed, so they would have well, do they have an APN number? But if you're familiar with condominium maps, the difference is if this was one building, then each unit within the building would be mapped out as the private space that's under exclusive ownership, and then the driveway that like say 2 units we're using would be shared ownership. So you'd create the same sort of map, so it divides the parcel into exclusive ownership zones as part of the entire. So it's still part of the entire parcel, and it still has the condominium document, the map, would be the entire parcel, and it would be divided into the exclusive ownership zones on that map. I don't know if I'm explaining it well.
Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. So a follow-up question, I guess you're saying there will be some common areas. It'll remain one large parcel. There will be 4 separate addresses. Who will own the land underneath the individual units?
Well, when it's a condominium, you can't subdivide it, so it's part of, it's a 4-unit condominium. But instead of dividing it into like a exclusive ownership zone, common space zone, shared ownership zone, you've maximized kind of the exclusive ownership zone within that tent. So it's still a condominium. It's just you've expanded the amount that's controlled by each owner and minimized the amount that's shared. And let me just put it this way: when you have a small property like this, it's not like a large 100-unit condominium where which a lot of us are familiar with. When you have that many units, you have the wherewithal to have clubhouses, pools, shared amenities. When you only have 4 units, what would you provide? You're not going to do a clubhouse for 4 units. The shared space you'd be talking about is a driveway, perhaps. So it's when you get to small things like this, this kind of makes sense, more sense.
Mr. Vice Mayor.
One last question. So essentially there will not be a homeowners association?
No, there's still a homeowners association because it's still a condominium, and they have to have shared insurance. It's one parcel. Yeah.
Thank you.
Ms. McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. When I met with the other members of your team, and they were trying to explain to me the difference between this detached multifamily, we were talking about it in that conversation, and I said what would be really helpful for me would be like a little chart that would compare and contrast single family versus condominium. So I created it for myself since I didn't get it as part of the packet. And you're absolutely, technically this is a condominium because there's one parcel and collectively they own the land. But they have no walls in common like a single family. They don't share a driveway like a single family. They don't have community open space like a single, do you see what I'm saying? They're taking care of their own exterior maintenance. They're taking care of their own landscaping. They have different architectural styles. They have different colors, and they have individual character. So and I know in my conversation with your team, it was this is the kind of product that the marketplace wants. So what this means to me is what's really being said here is what the marketplace wants are small single-family homes. And that's not exactly what we have here because it's being packaged and presented as a condominium. So I'm having trouble, I understand the technical definition and then I understand the instinctual definition of what's going on here and wondering why you didn't approach it in a different way as single family, as staff was saying that you could do in different ways.
Well, then you'd only have 2 units.
Uh-huh.
And then that, as I was saying, if you reduce it down to 2 units, then suddenly these aren't more affordable starter homes. You've got regular, expensive single-family houses.
On small lots.
No, they'd be legal, full legal lots, and
well, they're 5,000, I think they said. Yeah.
So, I guess. I mean, it sounds like you're having this can't get beyond the same thing the Plan Commission was grappling with, is is the intent of the council that everything in this in this type of zone has to be a attached condominium complex type unit? Is that what is wanted? I mean, they never came out and said that. And in my mind, if that's, if there's some sort of stigma associated with that, which, certain extent there is in my mind, it should be stated that that's what the town wants. I mean, we went at it that this was, providing what the zone district is there for, in a way that the current, what people are asking for, in a creative way. It's not underhanded in any way. It's not trying to get around the rules.
Further questions? Ms. Jensen.
Mr. Spalding, I just want to make sure I understood something that you just said. I think you said that Councilwoman McNutt, just paraphrasing for a minute, couldn't get around the condominium designation and thought that this should be attached. And you said nobody on the Planning Commission ever said that, right? Never said that it should be attached unit?
At the very end, Commissioner Bourgeois, at our second meeting, said that he said perhaps they should be attached or something like that.
The motion, the unanimous motion to continue it was to bring it back with something different, and there wasn't a direction from the council, the Planning Commission, to make it attached, correct?
No.
Thank you.
Further questions? Mr. Brzezinski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to follow up, I think, on Councilwoman McNutt's questions. And I know we're all going to say this, but we did have a chance to meet with the applicant, and I visited the site a couple of times. The latest was this afternoon, trying to visualize what's being proposed. And I know there were some issues relative to the right-of-way that the Planning Commission dealt with. But my sense is that the more significant question really was the issue of condominium. Now, maybe this is a totally new concept. We don't have anything in our rules and regs that accommodate it. We're in a new framework. And I'm not opposed to looking at a new framework. But I guess my question is, if you were to develop this as a fourplex, okay, with attached walls, condominium fourplex. The only objections I've heard you raise to that are that you don't see this as a product type that is popular or appropriate in this economy or in this environment right now, and that the roof structure would have to be taller because you need to have a good architectural outcome. But I guess for me the question is, I don't see that necessarily as a type of residential structure that is not compatible with the Los Gatos community. And it, to me, seems like something that I would like to hear an exploration on your part to better understand why you feel it is not an appropriate structural type for the product that you want to put on the ground. Because if you took those 4 units and attached them as a fourplex with the same architectural style, the same high degree of product that you deliver typically, you are absolutely opposed to that. That doesn't work for you. It wouldn't be considered. Those are questions I'd like you to explore.
I'll let my client answer whether or not they would be willing to even explore it. But just to give you an architectural comment on if I was to go that direction, a fourplex, the way the lot is shaped, it would need 10 parking spaces. You would have to have 10 designated spaces because you can't block any of the driveways because they'd be shared. You wouldn't want to have 10 spaces lined up across the front because it'd be hideous. So we would end up with a driveway on each side like we have here, a shared driveway, 2 shared driveways. We'd actually end up with more pavement because the driveway would have to be serving 2 units would have to be wider. We have to have enough space to maneuver the cars in and out of 6 parking spaces on each side, and then all that would be common space, and that would, not be space to put the basketball court and things like that. It's not family friendly. Then we'd have a 4-unit apartment block, basically, which I could make attractive. But again, the goal stated to me was to make 4 family-friendly dwellings, and when you put them together in an apartment block like that, what you get is smaller private yards, more shared driveway that is kind of useless for kids, and more trouble with the noise between the units because they're attached. And I'll let him address whether he entertained.
When we looked at this property, we thought about attached units, and when we approach a project like this, we always think, what would we like to live in? What would we want to live in? And clearly, I would want to live in a detached product. So what we tried to do was meet the terms of the zoning and density and build something that people want to live in as opposed to being forced to live in. I think we all would agree, given the choice, we'd rather live in a detached structure. So we tried to do the best of both worlds, and that is give the density that's required in the zoning, but yet a product that people would prefer and actually will look much more aesthetically nice for the neighborhood. Town Terraces, I think, shows that, and we modeled our project after that because we thought that was a big success for the neighbors in the town of Los Gatos. You're really not seeing attached products built any longer on small parcels like this, anywhere in the valley, for liability reasons, insurance reasons, and they just don't make sense. On the much larger projects, of course, you're going to get these condominium projects. They can put in pools, tennis courts, other common things that are used. But on small parcels like this, you're just not going to see an attached product proposed and, in my opinion, built here. So that's why we came up with this product, which Chris told me he's doing in Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and is becoming more and more common because the larger parcels are built out, and we find these smaller parcels now that are available. And this is the density that's given. So I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you have, and I appreciate the explanation, and I understand where you're going. I think part of our problem is to understand our own codes and language and what we are allowed to or not allowed to accomplish. Because I think Councilwoman McNutt's comments about the fact that it looks like we're putting 4 single-family residents on a smaller parcel that we haven't really accommodated within our own designation of what we expect. And I think, from my perspective, I would really like to understand more. I would like to understand exactly how this particular residential product works. I would like to understand more about the legals related to it. I would like to be able to get past this block that I've got right now that I heard in the Planning Commission, and that was, aren't we just building 4 houses for single-family residents on this parcel? And if we are, then why aren't we just building according to the standards that the town has? So that's the issue I've got. I don't have a resolution because I'm more interested in hearing the rest of your presentation and the direction you're taking.
Sure. I'm not quite understanding why everyone seems to have an issue versus attached or detached. I would look at it, what would you want? Would you want to live in an attached product or a detached product? I think that's pretty clear. Everyone want to live in a detached product. So why would we force people to have something that they really would prefer not to live in? And people just aren't building attached products like this on small parcels. They're just not. For liability reasons, you can't get insurance any longer for them. They're just too litigious. And more importantly, people just don't want to live in them.
Hi, I'm Mark DiMattei. I just wanted to address a couple of small points. I'm not a lawyer, but I've had a lawyer represent do the HOA for me on Town Terrace. And just so we all know, for the record, the restrictions on paint color, roofing type, who landscapes, the maintenance is all governed by the homeowners association, and the CC&Rs take care of and they address how the units are maintained. So there is CC&Rs that address color, roof type, landscaping, all of the rules of the project. So you need to make sure that in that CC&R it does explain, if you don't landscape, if you don't maintain and if you don't pay your fair share, that's all addressed in the CC&Rs. And in the HOA, there's a common insurance policy that's paid to insure the land. So there is the same type of restrictions and covenants on this project as it would be if it weren't attached. So that's addressed by the CC&Rs. I don't know if that helps you with that, but anyway, I just wanted to make that statement.
Mr. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So I don't know if this is answered before or not, but to me the definition of a condo is the space in between the four walls. And then there's the townhome, which is the detached condo, except you own the land underneath it. Right. Sometimes those terms are synonymous in California. Sometimes they're not. But getting back to who will own the parcel underneath these units, is it one big parcel that's owned by the current ownership who maintains ownership of that in perpetuity, or is it going to be split into 4 separate lots with 4 APNs, yet a common insurance policy? Can you clarify that for me?
I could attempt. So it's not 4 APNs. You own the airspace as you do in a condominium, and you own 2 feet down. Basically, it's to the bottom of your foundation. And there's a diagram that was provided to me when I did the project on Town Terrace to explain that. So you own the airspace in your unit, and then 2 feet down, because that's where the bottom of your foundation is. And there is a diagram from our previous legal team that provided the CC&Rs and the HOA, as well as the common area.
Mr. Vice Mayor?
So for clarification, the whole existing 15,000 and change parcel will be, the current ownership will retain the ownership of that parcel?
Just as it is with the condominium project complex. You own your airspace and you own 2 feet down, or whatever the bottom of the foundation system is on your property.
Thank you.
Anything else?
We will be having disclosures, and I will disclose that I met with you. But one of the things that I think you brought up when we met was this concern about insurance, that this type of project has an insurance, there's a benefit as to insurance. You want to explain that to us?
Well, the insurance is basically called a WRAP policy, and the WRAP, W-R-A-P policy is a wraparound policy that would insure this building as one building as opposed to separate buildings. And when you have the buildings all attached, the roof is in common, the walls are in common, the stucco or siding exterior is in common. So when something goes wrong, a plumbing pipe in a common wall leaks, it leaks into multiple units, and it causes this snowball effect. So the insurance on something like that is it's out there. You can get it, but it's kind of crazy in nature in terms of its cost, and that cost is then dispersed amongst the homeowners, which drives the cost of the units up. With this type of product that we're providing or we're proposing, everybody has their separate walls. So there's no attached roof, there's no attached stucco, there's no attached walls that could have electrical or plumbing in them, which makes this a lot less risky. So therefore, the cost of the insurance, which again gets passed on to the end user, is much less. So that doesn't require this WRAP policy. We're still insured, the project's still insured, but it's just a different type of insurance.
Thank you. That was very helpful. A couple things that came up at the Planning Commission with regard to your proposed development is that it exceeds the floor area ratio and it exceeds the living area allowed You want to address those issues?
As far as FAR goes, I think I'd have to defer to Mr. Spalding for that. I'm not qualified to discuss that. Yes.
This, again, this is a transition parcel between the single-family houses on one side and then the apartments and condos down Avery Lane, right? So for instance, right behind this building is the apartments have a FAR of 0.71, 3-story high apartment block. I don't have the staff report with me, but maybe I have, no, I don't have them with me, but as you go down the street to the south, to the south, most of the apartment buildings down there are over this FAR. Here they are. 205 Avery Lane is 0.44. 214 Avery Lane is 0.45. 215 Avery Lane is 0.56. 218 Avery Lane is 0.54. 219 Avery Lane is 0.53. And then the condo complex immediately adjacent is 0.34 because it has large grounds. But again, the point here is to try to build. It's a multifamily zone district, which is higher density, and that's what we're trying to do, is provide the density that the zone district is zoned for. And the purpose in their general plan for that is to get higher density housing. So that's what we're doing. And so it's just like we're trying to fulfill the needs of the city in a way that fulfills the need of the buyer.
Thank you. Further questions? All right, thank you. This is an appeal. The appellants had at least 10 minutes. And so anyone who wishes to address us on this item will have 3 minutes, and then we'll swing back to the appellants. If you want to speak to us, please submit a card. I have 2 cards. The first one looks like Elizabeth McLee or McLoy.
Thank you. My concern is about the building project at 550 Hubble Way in Los Gatos. Should this project go through, where do they plan to park all the trucks while construction is going on? Surely not on the street, since that is tenant parking. There should not be any construction on the weekends. Riviera Terrace has been very accommodating by not working on the weekends. At the last meeting, the architect, I believe, remarked that there were no apartments to be impacted by noise should they work weekends. My complex is separated by 550 Hubble Way by a driveway. There are 18-bedroom windows of my complex facing Avery Lane. The apartments and houses directly across the street, as well as at the corner of University and Hubble Way, will be greatly affected. There will be, where will be the portable johns? Again, should this project prevail, there might be the new owners, tenants of 4 condos houses. Where might they park their many cars? This street, Avery Lane, Hubble Way, is already filled with cars belonging to apartment tenants. Will there be double glass on windows and sliding doors to keep some of the noise control from such congestion of 4 houses so close together? Thank you.
Thank you. The last card I have is Chris Wiley.
I'm Chris Wiley, and I live around the corner from this. I have a concern the same way about the noise and the construction. That first part is a private driveway. I know. Oh, that's okay. The first part, coming off University, as you know, is a slanted up. That's a private area. That's totally private. Nothing has been mentioned of what they're going to do if they wreck that road, what they're going to compensate. and it's going to be a lot more traffic. And it's a funny kind of traffic because they really can't see around to go in and out of University. The other thing is, you're now going to make that public parking in front of that blue area. Anybody could park there. When Los Gatos meets, or Bocce Court, or anybody else wants to park there, they could park in there. That doesn't guarantee that the people on the inside are going to park there. And already, if you go around there around 8 o'clock at night, between the Bocce Court and between the people coming home from the apartments, that whole road is completely full of cars, except for the part up front, and that's because there's no parking signs. When the no parking signs were there, you had cars all the way up and down that street. But get back to, you call it affordable housing. Affordable housing, I don't know what affordable housing is anymore, because the ones on Town Terrace that you call affordable housing that you built were 1.9 to 2.1 million. So I don't know who I hate to use the word affordable housing for that kind of a situation. But when I first came to the Bay Area, I went to San Jose for a very short time. Those are called garden homes. When they're building them like they are today, they didn't call them condos. They didn't call them townhomes. They call them garden homes. They still had a homeowners association and a whole thing. This may be something for the town to start looking at, because I'm sure more will pop up in the little areas that we have, and it might be another thing to resolve that issue. But basically, what I feel sorry for is the town planning commission tried to communicate. I'd been there. The town tried to communicate. And when they can't communicate, instead of trying to communicate, they bring it up to your level. And I think it should be brought back as a learning thing for everybody for this kind of housing that they want to build. Go back to the planning commission and work it out. It's not fair to the commission all the time to have things that they reject just come up here and then just approved. I think it would be a learning thing to learn what is a condo, I even had to learn that. I found out that the houses by Highway 9 off of 17 were condominiums because they were pre-built. That's another one that there's no common walls. But I think we have to think about the type of calling the houses by names and coming up with another verbiage, and let the planning department work that with the commission and with these gentlemen.
Ms. Wiley, before you leave, I understand your concern about coming up with appropriate terminology, et cetera. Do you have any specific input with regard to the project as it now stands?
Well, yeah, I think it's too big. It's looking, one neighbor couldn't be here. He went on a vacation. He tried. He went away for a month and a half. But it looks right into the yards. It's this ominous, big thing. It's going to take the sale value for the houses next door and across the street down. I know the resale value of those houses having the apartments around them is an issue. But now even on the backside of the apartments that are at Tamarack, when I walked into there to ask them questions about something else, the first thing they said to me is, "Oh, can you help us with this structure? We're just renters. We can't complain, but we don't feel good about it being that big looking into our apartments."
All right, thank you. I have no cards from anyone else. Does anyone else in the audience wish to address us on this agenda item? Seeing no one coming forward, the appellants have 5 minutes collectively as a team. If there's anything else you want to share with us.
Well, just so that we know, two of the homes on Town Terraces, they sold for $950,000. So I think most of us would consider that entry level for Los Gatos. So it wasn't 1.9, it was $950,000. So that's what they sold for.
Anything further?
Yes, I just want to address the construction impact that one of the speakers talked about. So we will come up with a plan for construction impact, where the trucks would be parked, have an office down the street on University. Weekends were mentioned. We will agree not to work on weekends, and I'm always respectful of our neighbors. So if there's anything else that we can do to help mitigate any impact on the neighborhood, I'm completely open to that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So just because I don't know, I wasn't there in 2008, the property that you developed on Town Terrace, are those separate APN numbers, or is that all one parcel? How can you?
It's one part.
Category.
It's the same that I was explaining, where you own the 2 feet of ground underneath your unit or so, but the APN is the single APN. Each unit does have its own tax base, just like you would if you lived in a condo. As far as the APNs and how that's addressed, I'm not 100% sure on that.
Mr. Vice Mayor?
So one of the properties is a single-family home, and then
That has its own APN.
That has its own APN, and then the other 3 are on one large parcel with
They're on one large
other
parcel,
APN.
condoized site.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Larson, did you want to weigh in here?
Mr. Paulson was researching the APN issue on Town Terrace, and there are APNs issued for condominiums, but there's often an APN for the shared property as well. Since this hasn't gone through the mapping process yet, we're not sure what the applicant is proposing, but their APNs are a taxing number identification used by the county assessor. And typically for condominiums, there are APNs assigned to them, even airspace condominiums for taxing purposes. And then there's a shared parcel that has its separate APN as well.
Thank you.
So it would be treated the same as any other condo project.
All right. Does the appellant want to add anything else?
Thank you. That'll be all.
Thank you. Or I should say, are there questions? Seeing none, thank you. The public hearing will now be closed. Let's start with disclosures. I'm going to start down because he already disclosed a bit. Start with Mr. Przinski and come down the dais for disclosures.
Yes, I met with the applicant to discuss this particular property, and as I indicated before, then was able to visit a couple of times to get my own read on the property.
Ms. Jensen?
I visited the property, and at their request, I met with Mr. Howell and Mr. DiMattei. I've also had communications with Ms. Wiley.
All right, I met with the applicants, and I did visit the property. Mr. Vice Mayor?
I also met with the applicants, and I also visited the property.
I also met with the applicants, and I also visited the property.
All right, well, that was boring, but... You don't have to agree. All right. I'm now starting with see if the council has any questions of staff, first of all. Ms. Jensen.
I think this question is for Ms. Prop. Are there any rights at all created by the approval or denial of a previous project with respect to a new project coming forward?
Council has asked that question on whether prior project approvals create a precedent, and that not necessarily so. Each project stands on its own as set forth in both the general plan as well as the zoning ordinances. Requires the Planning Commission or the council to look at each parcel and their specific characteristics. So just because a prior body, being a Planning Commission or a council, approved one project on a specific lot, the subsequent bodies, decision bodies, may decide that there's other characteristics or other factors and not bound by those prior approvals.
Further questions? All right, I'm looking to the council then for, is this a question? Or are you going to jump right in? For a discussion motion, Ms. Jensen.
I'd like to make a motion. And my motion is to deny the appeal and to uphold the decision of the Planning Commission to deny the subject applications. On July 10th, the Planning Commission had a very thorough discussion of this project and unanimously sent the applicants back to come back with different ideas for this property. There were questions raised about the condominium ownership, and they were also raised on September 11th, at which point the council unanimously denied the application. And I think the reason that everyone is having such trouble with the condominium concept is, or having such trouble thinking that it's not single-family homes, is because it is single-family homes. And the reason we have a creative condominium ownership is because the size of the parcel. It's too small for a planned development, ergo you can't squeeze the houses on. The lots, if subdivided, are too small for single-family residents. So I applaud the applicants in coming up with the idea to create a condominium ownership to get 4 single-family houses where they couldn't otherwise. I think the Planning Commission was clear in seeing that. The council has had trouble tonight in trying to buy into the very creative solution that the applicant is presenting to us, but I don't think that it's creative enough. I would also like to include as part of my motion and remind everybody that the council can only overturn a decision of the Planning Commission for 3 reasons. And we shall put in our resolution denying or approving an appeal one of the following 3 things. The first is that there was an error or abuse of discretion. In Mr. Howell's letter of September 24th, he claims error in the Planning Commission saying that the Planning Commission was thinking that the project has to look like an attached condo complex. Mr. Spalding said tonight that that wasn't the case, that perhaps Mr. Bourgeois mentioned it, but clearly there was no error in that regard. The other item that was raised was the Town Terrace project. Ms. Prop just indicated that each project is viewed individually and there's no rights created by the approval of the Town Terrace project. We also have in our desk item the fact that a lower density is possible on this, the other item raised in the applicant's letter, or I should say the appellant's letter. So number 1, there is no error or abuse of discretion from the Planning Commission. Number 2, is there new information that was not readily or reasonably available to the Planning Commission? And the answer is no. Mr. Spalding indicated that the plans had not changed. And number 3, was the Planning Commission considering an issue or policy over which it did not have the discretion to do so? No, it has discretion to approve or deny applications for development in the town. So I don't think there is any reason that the council could find under section 29.20.300 to uphold any decision that would be adverse to the Planning Commission. And again, it was a unanimous decision. So my motion is to deny the appeal and adopt a resolution doing so and approve, or essentially uphold, the decision of the Planning Commission.
All right, we have a motion and a rationale. Is there a second? Mr. Vice Mayor.
I'll second the motion, but I thought maybe as one of the speakers spoke, the best approach may be to remand it back to planning for further review. One of the things...
Before you go there, we have a motion to deny. Are you going to second that motion, or?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I'm sorry to jump in. So we have a motion on the table to deny. Mr. Vice Mayor, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Spector. Remand it back to planning for further review. Again, this is something that the zoning is confusing. I don't dislike the proposal. I think that the proposal is interesting. I think there may not be a category for it exactly as it is currently zoned. I think there are a lot of unanswered questions about it, and I would need to do or see more research done on this moving forward if it were to move forward. But I do agree with Councilmember Jensen's analysis of this, that there's really nothing we can do here with the information that was presented. I don't see any error, but I don't want to see this applicant, not have a fair opportunity to move in a different direction with this, or perhaps go back to planning and do some more research going forward.
Further discussion. Mr. Brzezinski.
I want to follow on the Vice Mayor's comments. Although I do believe the motion was made appropriately and very thoroughly, and I am not in disagreement that I think that's a motion that has validity. But I'm wondering if indeed, because we've got this issue of the condominium concern and the inability that we've voiced to be able to fit the product into our standards as we understand them, that's an issue that the Planning Commission could use or could benefit by a more thoroughgoing exposition. I think we heard a little bit more tonight than I saw in the records of the Planning Commission, both Planning Commission meetings. And I do think that it's an interesting concept, and that it is something that we may want to investigate, not only for its creativity but for its utility in what we're attempting to achieve in our residential community. But I'm wondering if the maker of the motion, given what the Vice Mayor has just said, would be interested in a friendly amendment that I'm not going to make. I'm going to let that sit with the Vice Mayor. But the idea that perhaps there is an issue or a policy that needs to be further discussed, delineated, or since that falls to policy, is it something that the applicant could benefit from another bite of the apple by going back to staff, by getting further clarification, by perhaps offering an alternative to what you've offered so far and that you haven't considered to this point? I kind of heard in the Planning Commission response that they made some recommendations, perhaps, in some ways considered vague recommendations, but made recommendations in the first run, asked you to come back with a response to those, and that the response was minimal. And because of that, the sense was then we were not really responded to the way we expected to be responded to. So that's my inclination. But again, I'm not making an amendment or requesting an amendment to the motion. I'd like to hear from the rest of the council on this.
Further discussion? I have a question of staff. I am assuming, but I don't know, if the motion were to pass, would the applicant, if it chose to go forward, have to begin again?
If the decision is to deny the appeal and deny the applications, then yes, a new application could be filed and would require all new fees.
All right, further discussion. Ms. McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. So when I stop talking, there'll be a vote on the motion as it stands, or is there any interest in doing an amendment?
So far, no one has made a motion to amend.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
I won't make a motion to amend because I can't, but I did want to clarify. Option 4 before you would be to grant the appeal and remand the project to the Planning Commission. That is one of the specified authorities, so that's clearly not what the motion was that was made. Second, on the fees issue, if the council did, we don't waive fees. Staff does not have that authority. If there is a very similar project coming back in, the council could direct that it be on a time and materials basis rather than the flat rate fees. That may or may not be less expensive to the applicant, but that is available discretion to the council. And that's part of the fee ordinance. It's not in your packet tonight.
Okay. Further discussion. Ms. McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. I've been listening to the council discussion, and I believe at this point I will not support the motion because I do think that we should, in one way or another, send this back for more work. And I feel for the applicant because as much as we are feeling the information we're getting about the difference between single family and condominiums is vague, I do believe that they sincerely felt the information and direction they were getting from the town was vague. And so I think this could be a turning point in the conversation and an opportunity to revisit this with some fresh perspectives. I do want to make a comment about housing in general. I am a fan of different types of housing, and I think the smaller detached homes with a minimal amount of lot is certainly appealing to some people. However, I always, when I have an opportunity, want to make the point that everybody lives in a different way. And some people like living in apartments. Some people like living in detached single family with big yards. Some like them with small yards. Some like to live above a shop in downtown Los Gatos. So I don't think that we ever want to assume that everybody wants to live exactly like we want to live or we're able to live at this point in time given our budget situation. So that's always whenever I have a chance, I want to get that message out there. So bottom line is I won't be supporting this motion and hope that we have an opportunity to have a subsequent motion that will send it back.
Further discussion? I'm going to discuss before deciding whether or not I'm going to support the motion or not. And because for me, it isn't simply sending it back to the Planning Commission and having them and the applicant come up with something, because the application as it currently stands violates our ordinances. It is basically 4 single-family homes of 1,600 to 1,900 square feet. The reason the Planning Commission was unanimous in its vote has many reasons. First of all, this application exceeds the FAR by 0.269 to 0.47. It exceeds the living area by 4,075 square feet, which should be, to 7,076 square feet. It lacks the required community open space. I agree with the Planning Commission that they would not be able, with this application, to make any of the CUP findings under 2920-1901, and they could make the findings for denial under 66474 A, B, C, and D. So there is absolutely nothing wrong or that one can find a problem with under the Planning Commission's decision, which was a 7-0 decision. I mean, I could find nothing under our laws to grant an appeal that we could possibly hang our hat on. I'm also finding a challenge sending this back to the Planning Commission. I mean, yes, would I like some kind of project to fit, to work? Yes. But I see nothing to send this back to the Planning Commission with direction, because this project is violating our ordinances. And so therefore the Planning Commission didn't err. And so we would have to send it back to the Planning Commission to tell the Planning Commission what? To change the rules, to change the law. So the reason that I'm struggling here is I would have absolutely no problem if I could find some way to come up with it, to move to amend Ms. Jensen's motion, but I can't figure out any way to do it, because this is violating so many of our ordinances, and the Planning Commission did nothing wrong. So having said all of that, I'm going to support the motion, but I'm going to go back to staff with the question, if this applicant chooses to come back with something that does comply with our ordinances, and it can be detached condominiums, or it can be small single-family homes. There are ways to do that. If they choose to come that way, is there anything that I could move to amend Ms. Jensen's motion to make that happen?
Mayor and Council, I believe there are, besides the motion to deny the appeal, there might be 2 possible directions the council could provide. One would be if the current applicant resubmits, that staff will work with the applicant on a time and materials basis for their resubmittal to ease that process for them if the council wished to direct that. Second option would be for the council to direct either staff in the Planning Commission independently or working with the applicant to consider the bigger policy issues that have been raised through this application and by the Planning Commission and council discussion on, are there changes that maybe warrant consideration to our zoning and planning, or zoning code and planning policies. That would not be project specific, that would be town general and would have to occur if the Planning Commission and the council ever felt those changes were appropriate. Staff doesn't have any recommendations at this time. It would require a review of what other jurisdictions have done in similar circumstances. So those are two possible directions: time and materials basis for fee, or to launch a policy study with the Planning Commission to address this type of development on this parcel and other parcels in the future.
All right, thank you. Given the fact that we are dealing with one appeal right now, I'm not prepared to move to amend the motion to go into a very long policy change by the, to the Planning Commission staff, General Plan Committee, and Council. I don't think it's going to help this applicant at all. And so I will move to amend the motion to add that should this applicant resubmit a project to an application to staff, that it will be addressed by staff on a time and materials basis. So I have a motion to amend. I will first ask the maker of the motion, will she accept the amendment?
I have a question for staff first.
Yes.
And the question is, if I were to accept the proposed amendment, does that change in any way the action of the council in upholding the decision of the Planning Commission and indicating that there's no basis for appeal? Because I could see not accepting the amendment and leaving that to a separate motion, because I don't want to jeopardize the message that there is no basis for an appeal here.
I think the motion to deny the appeal was very, very clear, and there would be no change to that. It would be the subsequent new application that comes in. As Ms. Suzanne mentioned, it would be a new application. It's really how that new application would be feed is all that the amendment would address.
With that understanding, and with the understanding that the Planning Commission acted correctly, I would accept the amendment if I understand correctly that if it is premised on the notion of should the applicant decide to come in with a new project.
That is correct.
Then I will accept the amendment.
Mr. Vice Mayor?
I'll second.
Or accepted, okay. All right, we have a motion. We have an amended motion, accepted by everybody. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. We have nothing further on our agenda. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.